Crianças violentas. Minha filha, pensar muito dá dor de cabeça e não enche barriga.
Yeah. So the story is a boy meets girl. The nurse falls in love with one of the soldiers that's guarding the civilians that are traveling.
And welcome to the Sit Down, where we have conversations with creators from across this beautiful motherland of ours. My name is Makomboya, a filmmaker and an all-round story lover. And today we're sitting down with Elias, who is a producer that everyone in this continent should know about. And you want to know why? His body of work spans a wide range of documentary fiction projects that have premiered in competition at Berlinale, Tribeca, Montreal, Beijing, Stockholm, London, Durban. Honestly, sit down and settle in. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for taking your time to, allow us to see some deep insights into what it takes to produce films and feature films in this context. I think the perfect place to start, Elias, is, and I don't know if the definition changes, but in this African context, who is a producer and what does a producer do?
Well, let's start at the beginning. Like the story development.
Yeah.
I think the first role of the producer is to hold the space for the artistic development to take place, and that's usually a relationship. Like it's usually a throuple between a writer, a director, and a producer, or sometimes when the writer director is one person, it's just two people in that partnership in the beginning, the early development. And not only, like when I say hold the space, it's not just esoteric, but also coming up with the resources to empower your writer to take the necessary time and devotion to write a feature film screenplay. We usually say that they give a limb to each of the projects. So, and then we also engage consultants in the development project process to give the writers some perspective on their work. We bring in the casting director to start talking about who's going to perform in the film, location scouts, so that mood boards, pitch decks can be created. So the project becomes a bit more tangible by the time it reaches the financiers. And it's the producer that's driving all of that. And then you need to assemble a team, which I also like to say cast a team, because you're going to spend in a feature film context about 6 weeks at war, 12 hours per day, 6 days per week. You better work with people that you vibe with and see the world through a similar lens, and hopefully people that also are willing to give a limb for that project, that are as passionate as you are about the story that you're telling. I personally don't get very involved in post-production. I like to come and see a cut that the director and the editor are already happy with. So I like to keep perspective so I can come in and be useful in the process. So I usually let them work for 2.5 months before I come into the editing suite to look at it. And it's always a conversation with the director. There's never a prescription of what should be done. And we prefer for the directors to drive that process, because that's what their expertise is. We don't believe in producer's cut. All of our work has been finished by the directors who made it. And then it's about managing the rights for the rest of the life of that film, which is in perpetuity potentially, if you do a good job at keep updating the prints into the next technological
step.
But we then work hand in hand with the international sales agents to distribute the rights into multiple territories worldwide. Sometimes I feel like the point I am in my career, I'm talking to some of the broadcasters and streamers directly instead of going via a distributor, and also started acting as a distributor of African content. So we've acquired rights of films to relicense to broadcasters here in South Africa, or have facilitated deals of rights in Brazil and France to an Angolan film, because I travel a lot and have this very wide network. I've been facilitating a lot of deals in the distribution space lately.
Yeah.
So the producer is there from the very first day until the end, which is the end of the producer's life, because then the films will live beyond us.
Yeah. I'm wondering, from a very general perspective, what tools does a producer need to have when coming into production? And from a very specific point are there extra tools or something that extra you need to have coming from our continent, from the African continent? So what are the general tools you need as a producer and from the African context?
I think the first thing is resilience, because it ain't going to be easy.
Yeah.
It's like the financing space is very scarce.
Yeah.
So it's quite a cannibalistic space, like people function in silos because there's little money available out there. So there's very little sharing, which in my opinion doesn't foster a vibrant ecosystem. I feel like if there was more communication alone, a lot more would be happening. Never take a no for an answer, and be realistic about the material that you choose, that it is on pair with what you can deliver in terms of fundraising and technical skills. Like, be ambitious, but take one step at a time, because the stakes are so high in long form that making mistakes costs a lot of money.
Yeah, true.
And it's an unforgiving environment out there. So take your time with things in development. Be patient. Honor and respect the creative process, because it's not easy for anyone. What I hear from our writers is that it can get quite overwhelming and painful at times. So to respect the living, breathing animal that development is, and that every artistic process is different from the other.
And you mentioned something about casting and in terms of choosing the people to work with, and what's that process like, and what does that involve from a producer's perspective?
Again, you're going to spend a lot of time with people, and it's not just casting according to your taste. It's also the dynamics between multiple heads of departments, and to make sure you're putting a cohesive group of people around that table, because the work is so intense and so demanding, and you're at each other's face most of the day. So I think it's very important to identify people that you feel like share your sensibility, your political views of the world. Where do they hold the camera? How long they're willing to hold it for? That's what I mean by casting your team.
Yeah. And when people talk about producing, at least from what I know and understanding, they say one of the big things that a producer has to do is deliver the package, whether it's the writer, the director, like this. And Hollywood or Europe already has this profound names, like, I put in Spielberg or I put this actor and I'm sure we do have amazing actors within the African context, but how do you put up a package for a co-production for a director or actors who are not ideally international faces? How do you sell that package to financiers and say...
Very important to be able to convey that the talent that you are supporting can deliver. And usually to me, the easiest way to convince me is to show me your previous work. Show me the work that you think most represents you as an artist. So it's I think the very important part of a package is the previous work of the director, and that it communicates that they are ready to take on that challenge that they're proposing with the project on the table. And then the director's note of intention, it's what I would read next, as well as the synopsis and the producer's note of intention, to see if the core team is committed to making the same film. You don't have a producer talking about large audiences and box office intake with a proposal that is clearly to a niche audience from an artistic point of view. So the package needs to be cohesive. You know? The team members need to be speaking about the same project. So I haven't cracked this American way of financing a film on the back of how many tickets that actor can sell, because the problem in Africa is that we don't even have enough cinemas. So that like scale, the business of volume, is not really available to us because our distribution channels are so fragmented.
Hayo bukwele balomfa thina sekwathazwa banga madoda akwagqirha hayo bukwele balomfa.
Yayazi mos sasekwazi thina ngezinto ezenzekileyo entabeni.
Sisilehe la ntwana kunjani?
Uyavuma songcolisa isiko wena pha.
Unesibozo kaloa
Umfazi nosapho.
ucimba uyakuthanda ingxaki yakho ndiyayibona wena uyawuyika into oyifunayo.
What inspired you to take up this project, and what was the journey like in trying to get this produced? Why this story, and what was that journey like?
I'm a gay man that grew up in a country that has an extremely chauvinistic culture. And when I arrived in South Africa, one of the things that really struck me was how contemporary the Constitution was and how human rights were taken extremely serious. And it's one of the first countries in the world where people of the same sex could get married.
Yeah.
But the reality that I was confronted with on the ground was vastly different. And I started hearing about corrective rapes and about what happened in these initiation spaces with gay children. And that was my point of entry, was being like, it really resonated, the growing up in an environment that was full of toxic masculinity, where my rights ascertained to me on paper were not really available to me in society. And it was, like I mentioned in our previous interview, the moment that John and I came together to really make it or break it. And that thing of the choice of the material that is on pair with where you are in your career. And it was a very contained film that was mostly shot around one location. So we basically lived in that farm for the 5 weeks of production and got it done. But there was also a desire to argue the notion that queerness is something that was imported from the West, that gay black men exist, and to represent that reality. This was also part of John's desire with the proposition. And we never set out to make an ethnographic representation of Xhosa culture. It was a fictional narrative from an urban, white, gay male perspective from the get-go. We're not trying to make it anything other than that.
Yeah.
But it was read as Bible, like as if we were documenting their culture and representing everybody. And we're like, that's not what we set out to do. We're telling a story. This is fiction. And it's somebody's story, but it's not everyone's story. And there was a very big expectation that the film was going to tell a story of a botched circumcision, because that's what the press scrutinizes the ritual with year after year, because children die, and children's penis get amputated because of processes that are done without much integrity. But what we learned in making this film is that it was a really beautiful ritual. And we experienced being in the company of men before and after them going through this rite of passage. And I experienced firsthand how much it can transform, and how positive and reassuring experience it can be when it's done with your family around it the way that it's supposed to be. You know? So we didn't want to go there because it's not our culture. We didn't want to judge the cultural practice. We wanted to tell a story of love between men set in this hyper-masculine space. So it was just a backdrop. It wasn't really an expose of what the tradition actually is.
And what was it like trying to get it off the ground? How long did it take?
Very long.
Need to mix. Did you need to mix up to get it done?
Yeah, the white hair, the wrinkles, like it's all making them worse. I was such a young boy when I started this thing. I was like in my early 30s.
Oh goodness.
Yeah. It was, Mark, it wasn't easy. Hey, first of all, I didn't know how to finance when this started, and I had to learn that first. And luckily, the writers needed enough writing time as well that allowed for me to catch up. And I financed another film before I financed The Wound, which was half the budget of The Wound was. Like I said, like one step at a time. That thing, you know, there's no point in going out to finance a film of almost $1 million if you haven't financed anything else before.
Nós conseguimos a independência, mas estamos numa guerra sem fim. E os grandes chefes, esses, estão a lutar por poder.
Satanás.
Soldados são como crianças violentas. Minha filha, pensar muito dá dor de cabeça e não enche barriga.
Please tell me this was simpler. Tell me something good came from, like. Tell me there was no revolution now. At this point, I'm just
well, it's actually the civil war in Mozambique is on and off. Hey, it hasn't completely settled. In 2016, when the film was released at the Piazza Grande in Locarno, it was very much happening again. So the film all of a sudden became very current. But it was the story of this nurse that is going on her first assignment after nursing school. And she's taking the train from the south to the north of Mozambique during the war in the 80s. And it was called the Train of Salt and Sugar because they burned all the sugar plantations and sugar became like something very expensive. And they would bring from the coast tons of salt to the border and exchange that for sugar, but like in a very unfair or maybe 10 bags of salt for a bag of sugar. So like that is history. So that's where the title Train of Salt and Sugar comes from, because would risk their lives to go and exchange salt for sugar because that's how they would make a living and see their families through those tough years of civil war. So the story is a boy meets girl The nurse falls in love with one of the soldiers that's guarding the civilians that are traveling the train.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he's shot and dies in her arms.
Wow.
It's a very classic narrative. Licinio Azevedo is at the helm. Licinio is actually a Brazilian who's been living in Mozambique for 50 years.
Yeah.
He came as a photojournalist, and he was in that train himself multiple times, documenting that trip. And I feel like he tells a beautiful, authentic tale of his country at war.
I think that has been a journey and quite an in-depth conversation on the madness and the beauty of producing, and especially producing in this African context. So, Anna said, thank you so much for giving us the time, sharing the knowledge, sharing all this information. I think it's going to help a lot of people within the continent to redefine, how to tackle producing all these stories you have stacked. Everyone has stacked up in their own spaces. And is there a way people can have a conversation with you if they want to, or if they have questions? Is there a Twitter handle? Is there an Instagram handle? Is there an email that you'd...
My email is er@urukumedia.com. I'm very old. I'm not on Instagram.
I thought you'd be on Snapchat. Come on. Or TikTok. Come on.
No, I'm not. I'm on Facebook, and that's it. My name is Elias Ribeiro. I can be easily found there as well.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Elias, and thank you for taking
Mark,
the
it's
time.
been a pleasure talking to you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and good work. It's good to share these things.
Yeah.
It's a good initiative.
All right. Thank you, Elias. Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching, and remember, you can catch a much more in-depth conversation that I have with Elias on our podcast. Link in description. See you on the next one.